Perfect. Good morning. Is this everyone's first time in here? Anyone? Raise your hand if it's your first time. Awesome. So on behalf of the Historic Preservation community and our hosts, welcome to this beautiful building. So at first when I was asked, I thought, okay, I can get up here and I can talk about all the really interesting historic traditions I've uncovered in my work. I am an architectural historian, and what I do is I humanize buildings for people, whether it's developers or architects or property owners, homeowners. I help them understand the who, what, when, and why of why a building was constructed, and then how the buildings evolve. So what's original and what's not. And I've uncovered some pretty interesting stories. Most of the time, it's the smallest buildings with the greatest stories I find fascinating. But I thought I'd do something a little bit different today. I thought I'd do something that you can kind of walk away with and look at Charleston in general, not just about one specific building and give you a nerd history lecture about all the buildings that I've done. So I want to talk about today how old buildings cultivate tradition in communities. That's kind of what I want to hope you guys walk away with. And then I want to talk about one of Charleston's greatest traditions. All right? So Yvonne kind of stole my thunder a little bit, but I want you to close your eyes and think about a tradition that you have. Just close it, if you haven't already. And hopefully it's not Yvonne's tradition of the bells. I love it because all of a sudden, most of you now have this feeling of content, right? And this smile on your face, like you're happy. And that's what a tradition is, right? In this crazy world of unknowns, traditions are the known, right? In this crazy, unpredictable world that we live in, traditions are the constant, right? No matter how much money you've made that year, or whether or not you got up to work out on the days that you were supposed to, or I don't know, the fact that you ate maybe too much Taco Bell throughout the year, or you didn't do your New Year's resolutions, right? No matter what, traditions are the constant, right? They define who we are as a group of people, right? And oftentimes they separate us from other families and other communities. It creates almost this sense of identity and belonging. It's familiar to you, right? Traditions often also are our bloodlines in communities and our backbone in communities and in families. I mean, think about it. Anyone here are in a family where you live all over the country, maybe all over the world, but for that tradition, you best be there. You are there and you are present. It is the backbone, perhaps, of your family. Traditions are passed down, right, from generation to generation. That is literally, I think, the definition of a tradition, right? Passed down from generation to generation. Maybe it's a tradition you have with the rest of the country, right? Maybe it's a tradition you have that you only can connect with people that you've only read about in history books, right? For example, the 4th of July, one of my favorite holidays, right? None of us were present at the signing of the Declaration of Independence, although I would have liked to have been, right, in 1776. And we hear about American independence, we hear about the struggles and how they won. We even sing about it, right, before our sports games and ceremonies, right? How does it go? Rockets, red glare, bombs bursting in air, gave proof to the night that our flag was still there. And 240-something years later, we're sitting in our lawn chairs in the United States of America, looking up at that same exact sky, right? The same exact moon, which to me blows my mind every time I think about that. And we are watching the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, but thankfully for us, it's not bombs, it's fireworks, right? And for that one moment, or maybe the few minutes or the hour, if you have an hour-long fireworks show, that's an awesome community in which you come from. But you are connected with the rest of the people you are with, the rest of the community, the rest of the people in America that are doing that same exact thing. And I like to think that for that minute, you are connected to the people that fought for our American independence, right? And should you catch a glimpse of that American flag waving in the glimmer of that firework, I've often cried during fireworks shows, but I think that's just because of my job and what I do, and I think about all the people that have come before us. But it gives you this sense of place, right? This sense of knowing and this sense of maybe who you are, maybe a little bit of pride. Maybe it's a tradition you have with a family member that you've never met before. Anyone here come from a family where they tell you, oh, you remind me of somebody. You would have loved to have hung out with them. You're like, God, I would have loved to have met them. Yes, we probably could have had a really good time. And in that moment, when you're doing your traditions for your family, it's like you are connected to them, even though you never may have met them before. Or maybe a tradition you have with a family member that is no longer with us, and you experience that tradition with them, right? And for that one moment, you are present and you're connected with that person again, right? Oftentimes we turn to tradition to reconnect with people that are no longer with us, right? And so tradition is rooted in history, right? Tradition are our roots. And so I like to think of it as, when it comes to our collective community, I feel like there are two essential things we need to a community tradition, and that is people, right? And setting. And specifically, I believe our old buildings are integral to cultivating community tradition. Our old spaces and our familiar places are essential to fostering, advocating, and reviving traditions. Maybe you agree, maybe you disagree, but think about it. Our old buildings kind of give us a bloodline and a backbone. They give us a sense of identity. They give us a sense of place. I mean, our old buildings in each of your hometowns make each of your hometowns different, right? Your hometown was created for a specific reason, whether it's textiles or the railroad, or maybe here in Charleston, the seaport, and your buildings reflect that. And that's what makes you different from another community or another neighborhood. Because should we lose all of our old buildings, we'd all just become Anywhere USA, right? And we don't want that. Our buildings are also passed down from generation to generation. I mean, think about this building. This is spectacular. Thank you for having us here. But I really wish we could hear the rain. Can we hear the rain? No, we can't. The rain sounds the same in this building as it did most likely back in 1799 or in 1804 when it was completed. That is fascinating. These buildings are almost the tangible to the intangible traditions that we have. And I believe they are the keepers of our memories, right? The keepers of our traditions. I tend to humanize buildings way too much, and I feel like they have a soul and an energy, so if I go off, just go with it. But I want to take you to a little place called Moodus, Connecticut. Anyone ever heard of that place before? Okay, so I have a student. I am a professor at the College of Charleston. I teach in the Historic Preservation Department, as well as having my own firm. But I had a student who was from Moodus, Connecticut, and this past semester she had a project. The whole class had a project, and it was to look at your hometown. Tell me what its identity is. Tell me what story your hometown is telling you. Tell me what traditions you have in your hometown, and what kind of community and place is it? And she came up to me and said, Professor LT, that whole bloodline and backbone stuff you talk about, we don't have that in Moodus, Connecticut, okay? We don't have, there's no place for us to gather. I don't even know my neighbors. There's no community tradition at all. I don't even know what place is. We just live and we work. And so we did a little bit of research, and we found out that Moodus, Connecticut had a thriving downtown at the turn of the 20th century, right? Into the early 20th century. I think I have another picture. Here you go. Post office, stores, businesses, right? But in the 1960s, the citizens and the town wanted to modernize their downtown. I mean, this is the age, this is the space age in the 1960s, right? The onset of highway construction and mass production and cookie cutter developments, right? This is when the vehicle starts to really take over our city and our communities. And so they wanted to modernize their downtown to create a state-of-the-art, pioneering strip mall. Oh, we can't really see it. Darn. But same exact view, strip mall. And today, this strip mall is vacant. It's not being used. And it's because our buildings are that, like I said, keeper of memories, keeper of identities. Our historic buildings tell a story of, yes, how far we've come, and yes, we can all learn from them if we study them and study them through history, but they are almost the subconscious way of feeling that you're part of a place, and it's familiar to you. She came back the next day and was really excited because she realized that Moodus, Connecticut is trying to change their name. They're trying to change their name after the Native American tribe that founded the community over 1,000 years ago, to get the town back to its roots, to make people want to stay and to create more of a community and tradition. And if any of you ever drive through Moodus, let me know. Hopefully they're on the right track. But the same thing happened in Rockville, Maryland, Okay, same thing. They demolished a thriving downtown to create a state-of-the-art shopping mall in 1972. That, I know, it's like, ugh. Think about it, main streets, and I don't want to bash the 1960s and the 70s because there was some really cool architecture that came out of that time, but I wouldn't have done a lot of the things that maybe they had done. But our main streets and our old buildings tend to cultivate small businesses and local businesses because there's small spaces and diverse spaces. Can you see that in a way? In Charleston, we're having a crisis now, though, because a lot of our small businesses are going away from our old buildings, and it's because of how much in demand Charleston is. But when you look at an old downtown and an old main street, it's most likely the small businesses that are thriving. This mall failed within 30 years, vacant. Now, the town has demolished it, and it's now an empty lot where that thriving downtown used to be. But the town of Rockville, a few miles away, built a town center because they needed something where a community can gather and congregate and create tradition. And they created a town center that kind of mimics their old downtown, a little bit more pedestrian friendly, right? Not like the Mount Pleasant Town Center. I'm from Mount Pleasant, I can say that. But a place where, not from Jersey, but live in Mount Pleasant. But it's important. But it's a place now where the community can gather and to create their own memories and traditions. And old buildings have such a weight to that. I'm working on a project right now called Mosquito Beach. Anyone ever been to Mosquito Beach? Okay, right? Mosquito Beach is right before you get onto Folly Beach. So you're driving on Folly Road, you take a right onto Soul Agree Road, and it's a strip of open marsh like this. But during the age of segregation, Folly Beach was a white-only beach. And so for the black citizens living around Folly Beach, this place was where they could swim. Mosquito Beach was their own place in their own community in which they could use the water and boat and swim and do everything they would do maybe on Folly, but here. And so they created juke joints. This is as early as the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. Juke joints where you jukebox, you sit around and you dance and you talk. They created, I wish we had that right in Charleston. They created a boardwalk, a pavilion, and unfortunately Hurricane Hugo took those out. But they created a space for tradition. I conducted an oral history with the help of Historic Charleston Foundation on the residents of Mosquito Beach, who are still there alive, right? And they talked about Easter Sunday, walking on the boardwalk with their Sunday's finest, and it was a place where you went to be seen. You had to be seen. They talked about the music, the dancing, and the food. Today, Mosquito Beach has deteriorated in a way, and it's because the children of the generation that established this lived in an age where they could go off and go to college, right? So they moved to places like Manhattan, Chicago. They went to Clemson and USC, right? Moved away for a little bit. But now they're back in Mosquito Beach with their families, and they want to revive the tradition of the place. And so this being a waterfront community, you can imagine how many threats of development they have right now. So the residents have hired us to try and create Mosquito Beach into America's next historic district with buildings that look like this, so they can protect their tradition and their community and revive it. I love that. So you are affected by architecture every second of your life. Every second. Think about it. Unless you're on a cruise, or unless you're on the moon, or in the desert, maybe Antarctica, I don't know if they got buildings down there, but you are affected by architecture every single second of your life, and subconsciously it affects you. It impacts the way you feel on the street. I don't know about you, but I'm consistent, maybe because I'm looking at all these buildings all the time, but I'm consistently feeling out how I feel on a street. There's one spot, whenever I walk past Francis Marion Hotel, and then I get to that parking garage, I immediately turn to try and make my way across to go to Marion Square, right? It's just that feeling you get. And old buildings give you a certain feeling that is unique. Like I said, it's a sense of place. And even though you may have never been there before, it gives you, it's familiar. And it reminds you of traditions past that you may not even know about. Anyone here watch Hallmark? Yes, Holland watches Hallmark. Inappropriately amount, I watch Hallmark a lot. And at Christmas time, they like unroll like 50 different Christmas movies, right? In a span of like 3 weeks, it's insane. but they all have the same script, every single one, right? It's a cute downtown in a snowy environment, and they're trying to save the local bakery or the local movie theater. And the girls come back home to do the job, and she falls in love with a hometown boy, and it's all set around Christmas traditions and the lighting, and we have to get the sleigh ready for the parade down Main Street. I mean, but it's the way you feel when you watch that, you feel good, right? It's the setting. Look at the setting. You know what I'm talking about. Anyone been here? Magic Kingdom? Yes, my favorite places. Why in the world did Walt Disney make Main Street, USA look like this? He wanted people to walk down it and to feel familiar, feel like they were walking in memories, in your own traditions, right? Walt Disney is considered one of the greatest urban planners. I mean, maybe it's just me that considers that, but I think there are other people that consider him one of the greatest urban planners. Look at the diversity of buildings. A main street cannot be all one style, and it cannot be all new. It's got to have the different generational touches to it. Thank you for your service. All the different generational touches to it, right? I mean, these buildings, although they're 100% fake, right? Except, no, you actually, I guess you can go in and get chocolate and things like whatever you do on Main Street. But they give you this sense of tradition. And man, if Main Street, USA doesn't look a whole heck of a like King Street, USA, I don't know what does. And the greatest thing about that is that we got the real thing. We have it, and it's alive with people and cars and small businesses and big businesses like Starbucks. But that's a whole other story for a different time. But it's alive, right? People come from all over the world just to see how you live. Do you see that? People, if Charleston looked like Magic Kingdom, Main Street, USA, or I don't know, a museum where no one was using these buildings, I don't think Charleston would be as successful, right? We are authentic. People come from all over the world to see you on a conference call walking down King Street. They come from all over the world to see the students walking from class to class along the cistern. My students hate it because they have to dodge behind photographs, right? And they're in their top knot, and probably horrible things went on the night before, and we don't want to know. And they're trying to get to class, right? But how cool is that we have the real thing? And King Street is one of the most successful main streets. Charleston doesn't have a main street. We don't do that, right? We don't have a main street named Main Street. We have King Street, and it's alive. And King Street cultivates culture and community and tradition within us. And the safeguarding and protecting of our old buildings has been a Charleston tradition for a very long time. Do you guys see that? How Charleston is 100% unique in how we view and feel about our old buildings? But this is not a new idea to the 21st century. I think I have a picture. Here you go. Here's the Charleston seal, city seal. Perfect. She guards her buildings, customs, and rights. Buildings, right? This is what it says. She guards her buildings, customs, and rights. Buildings, number one. Because of that, and in 1931, do you guys know, in 1931, the residents of Charleston, South Carolina, established the first historic district in the country, and quite frankly, possibly the world. We're working on trying to prove that. You guys know historic districts. Have you been, you probably, some of you, oh, you live in one if you live downtown, right? The residents of Charleston in 1931 put a circle around what was then just the South of Broad neighborhood that was considered the historic district, and said, we want to maintain this ambiance and character here. I mean, this is the age, this is the same year as the Empire State Building is being constructed, right, in Manhattan. Steel, metal, taller, bigger, reach the sky, right? But the Charleston citizen says, no, right here in this circle, we want to maintain this ambiance. But if you look at the Historic District Ordinance of 1931, I don't expect you to, I have it if you want to see it, it's not necessarily to save the Revolutionary War heroes' home, or not necessarily to save Rainbow Row, which really wasn't even all that to do at that time. It was to maintain the quality of life and tradition within the district for the residents living there. They had the foresight to do that. And it has been a Charleston tradition since then in 1931 to safeguard her buildings and traditions. I heard this quote at the Preservation Society meeting last week. It says, "Nothing remains special by accident." Right? Isn't that interesting? People are working every day to make sure Charleston looks the way it does. And because of this ordinance in 1931, we have the building traditions of 300 years worth of people here. This Vintage Lounge, have you been to Vintage Lounge? My favorites. They were one of my clients. So before the building was rehabilitated into a restaurant, I went in and I uncovered the history of the building to understand energetically how to honor the building, but also how the building evolved, right? So they can understand what's original and what's not. Building was built in 1899 by the Carish family, Jewish grocers. Did you know that all of Upper King Street was dominated by Jewish families and their businesses? To the point where in the early 20th century, it was called Little Jerusalem. So when you go up to those traditions are still intact in those buildings. This vaulted ceiling is an original piece of the building. And the developer decided to honor that building tradition to the point where they put, I think, like gold leaf on it, right? And so when you walk in, it's like, bam, wow. And I think Architectural Digest just named it one of the most beautiful bar in South Carolina. We have all of Upper King. We have the buildings that experienced the American Revolution, the Civil War, the Great Depression. We do have the signers of the Declaration of Independence. We have their houses. We've got General Beauregard's headquarters. We have the small house that the single mom lived in during the Great Depression, or the railroad worker during the Industrial Revolution. We have all those building traditions here. That also means we have the building traditions of histories that are very negative, right? We have our slave quarters, guys. We have the slave mart. We have the old exchange building. And because of that tradition of safeguarding all of our buildings in Charleston, it is our responsibility in Charleston to tell that story, to tell the entire story of everybody. And that's Charleston's tradition, right? We also have buildings that are a little bit nondescript, like this guy. You all know him. Her. I was the architectural historian assigned to do her rehabilitation, right? So we went in, we researched her history and how she evolved. Big Bertha was built in 1942 by Albert Sattilli. And this is actually his handwriting up here that says, original, Big Bertha. Albert Sattilli, so that name did not just come out of the blue, right? It had a meaning. He built it as his last great movie theater. He built the Riviera, he built the American, he built the Garden Theater, which is now Urban Outfitters, he built the Gloria Theater, which is now Sattilli Theater. And he built this, but it never was complete. The exterior was complete, but the interior never was. And he leased it to the US Navy in 1942. And the US Navy used it as a state-of-the-art training facility for the entire Southeast. For the first time, the government used educational videos to train their men. It was a way to quickly mobilize men and get them the heck out, get them abroad. Here you go. These are sailors inside 1056 King Street, sitting in the same exact spot you all sit every month to listen to a Creative Mornings speaker, learning how to speak Japanese, learning how to engage in submarine warfare, learning how to shoot a gun. They most likely had physical training right before this, but the second they left this building, they went to the front. So just think about how many people sat in the same spot you did. These buildings are the tangible to our intangible traditions. People that looked at this building the same way. Oh yeah, there was a grocery store and a roller rink after that. There you go. And that's Big Bertha. She encapsulates the traditions of so many people. So, old buildings, I believe, are essential, right, in maintaining that character, identity, sense of place, and in turn, tradition. But Charleston, I mean, we are on par with some of the finest cities in the world because of how we look. And through that, I mean, we get to live in it. It's fascinating. So my wish for you is that when you leave here, you think about your traditions, right? Think about what you have. Try and find out the root of it, the history of it, because no tradition just pops out of the blue, right? There's always a story. And to be present during it. Close your eyes, wiggle your toes, because that may be the one thing you remember in the end, right? And look around you when you're doing that tradition. Because these buildings, I mean, this building has been here long before us and will be here long after us, right? Fingers crossed. Think about what buildings encapsulate your traditions, and when you're gone, how that's going to be still a part of you. And then lastly, when you walk out of Charleston, when you walk down these streets, look up. Walk in the middle of the street if you can. That's my favorite thing to do. See these buildings the way they were meant to be seen, and to touch them, and use them, because using them and honoring them is truly Charleston's greatest tradition. Thank you. Is that enough time?
We have a few minutes for questions if you guys want to ask her anything. No, go for it.
Do you have a favorite building?
Oh, I knew someone was going to ask me that question. I knew it. Do I have a favorite building? And the answer is no. I recently, last summer, took a road trip with my husband cross country. And we literally went to the Rockies and back. And I don't have a favorite building, but I think my favorite was America's main streets in the Midwest. I would relive that. I mean, Kansas, Nebraska, there are some amazing main streets and people doing creative things to revive these main streets, and it's fascinating, right? They're trying to revive old traditions and new traditions, but I have to say, I couldn't pick one. Collectively, Midwest main streets are my favorite. To answer your question.
Brittany, I love what you said about Charleston being like a living museum.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll go aside from that. Being in this living museum that you get to basically preserve as you are working here, what's it like for somebody like a history buff who doesn't think, oh, I love history, but I want to get a 9-to-5 job? What's it like getting a career in this?
It is mind-blowing every day. I'm not going to lie, because you're uncovering the real stories of real people every day. And some of these people's stories haven't been uncovered since, maybe haven't been talked about since they died. I mean, I'm working on buildings. I think I have an example. This little guy on State Street. Oh, there you go. He was kind of ignored for the longest time, right? But we got in it, we did its restoration, and we researched it, and we found out it was built in 1866, and it was used as an apartment for people, for veterans of the Civil War. In 1930s, it was a lunch counter for the black citizens that could not eat in the other restaurants. I mean, it's stories like that that are mind-blowing. And I've learned more about American history doing this work than I have in any classroom. It's because you're uncovering the real stories of real people. You're not just learning about George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. It's almost like you're learning about the Americans that did truly change American history. The no names, but now they do have names.
You're helping people.
What do you think about like the trends and way directions are going with Charleston becoming such a more expensive city, and then people on King Street, it's only major national businesses that seem to afford the rent. How do you feel about that direction?
It's sad, and I don't know what the answer is, but I think we need to change something. I think what makes King Street so unique is that it was always an epicenter for local businesses. I mean, those buildings were constructed by the people of Charleston, and now you have Athlete's Foot and Starbucks and J. Crew, and yes, those are all great and dandy, but we need to figure out something at the city level that's going to cater and nurture to our residents, because I don't know, people that are even working downtown, I mean, people don't live downtown too much anymore. We're all living in the outskirts and then coming in. And sooner or later, it is going to be like a Disney World. You're not going to see people, locals, walking down the street perhaps. And I think if we can catch it, if we can do something, and I'm not sure what, the Board of Architecture Review has a hard job here, because they're helping regulate what buildings look like, and not quite the uses, but, and they get a bad rep, right? Like, oh, we can't do that. They're telling us we have to do this, but they're just trying to safeguard what we cherish. And I don't know, I think it's going to take the locals to demand something that we do. And maybe, I know in other small towns, they have like a no franchise law on their main street. Folly Beach just unraveled a no franchise law to keep Folly Beach weird, right? Isn't that, to keep it weird and unique. I don't know if we're too far gone from that, but there needs to be a city ordinance or something that keeps King Street local. I don't know, urban planning is hard.
If nobody has any final questions, I'll let everybody kind of start getting to work, but do you have any final thoughts? Anything that you...
Just, I hope that, like I said, just use these buildings and touch them and look at them. Look up. That's it.